All right, and we're live here from the beautiful Burley Corners in northern Penfield Township. I'm Michael McCullough. I'm with Willard Library, and this is Stories at Sundown. My guest this evening is T.R. Shaw. T.R. Shaw has been a college journalist. He's a Navy veteran. He's been, maybe most famously, at least in Battle Creek, was the fourth generation owner of Shaw Funeral Home. But throughout all that, I've known TR for 20 years or so now, and he's been a leader and very active in Rotary, long active in Battle Creek Brass Band, and most recently on the board at the Regional History Museum. And he's an author, recently published his book, Defy the Immediate. We're going to talk about that a little bit tonight as well. But TR, welcome to Stories at Sundown. It's great to have you.
Great to be here. Kind of miss being around the campfire there, but
well, yeah, it's a sacrifice I make. I have to get home and build the fire, split the wood. Yeah. I have to drag my Ethernet cable all the way down. I got a 200-foot Ethernet cable. So.
Yeah, technology today. That's great. So.
Well, it's so good to have you, and I can't wait to talk about your book. I've been reading it and taking notes, but want to hear a little bit just about you. I mean, I think 4 generations in Battle Creek's first funeral home, right?
Yeah. My probably best known for our family. We had the Shaw Funeral Home here it went back with our family to 1909. My great grandfather came here, saw an opportunity, and purchased a funeral home with another colleague. And at that time, it was Battle Creek's. Was the descendant of Battle Creek's first funeral home in 1866, and we go back that far. We didn't really, the funeral profession didn't really develop until right after the Civil War, because up until that time, people never went more than 25 miles from home, and when somebody died, the local church took care of them. The minister did the service. The local carpenter built a casket and they buried him in the churchyard. But
yeah,
the Civil War were the first people that actually in this country who died quite a ways from home, and it required people to take care of them, prepare them, and bring them back to their homes. And that's kind of when all of the funeral profession started more formally here in the United States, at least.
Yeah. So, and what brought your ancestor to Battle Creek in the first place?
Well, my great grandfather, Franklin Shaw Sr., was I believe he came up from Illinois, and he worked in this area. He was a casket salesman.
Okay.
And he, obviously, you're close to the funeral profession when you're selling caskets and doing that. So he got to know who's who, and I think he probably just saw an opportunity to start a business here. And back in those days, the funeral home was a combination of another business because you didn't really have the numbers in the business that you have today. So they started as a undertaking and picture framing company. They had like a picture studio, and then the back room, if you needed a funeral service, they can just shut the business down and go take care of somebody.
Huh.
Same thing in Bellevue. We had the funeral home in Bellevue, and even up until till we purchased it, and it was 1975. Carl Lehman there still had a furniture store, so he had a furniture store and a funeral home, and the slogan was "Comfort for the living and the dead."
You're not making that up, are you?
No, he actually had a sign there that had that. I think it was in his furniture store, but. That was part of small town America, and it was like on top of that, a lot of the funeral homes ran ambulances. My grandfather ran an ambulance service here, and matter of fact, our funeral home I think was probably the first. There's a picture I think in the book there of the horse-drawn ambulance. It was one of the first ambulances in Battle Creek, and of course, funeral homes ran the ambulance because they had the equipment and they had the cot and they had a vehicle. And we actually ran an ambulance up until the 1950s. as kind of a sideline too. So and in some places in the United States, a lot of funeral homes still do run ambulance services too. So it makes sense in small towns. If they've got the equipment, they can transport people around. So
Yeah.
So.
Well, I know that you're a real student of history. Obviously, you're on the the Regional History Museum board.
Yep.
It's kind of interesting to see how that business has kind of like grown with the town. I mean, from your family was there from the beginning, and it's changed so much. What was it like? What was it like growing up? Fourth generation of really a pioneer town. You're still kind of, you weren't the earliest pioneers, but you're pretty dang early, and then being in the funeral business as well.
Mm-hmm. Well, we kind of, when I was young, our old funeral home downtown, which is right between the Congregational and Presbyterian Church there at 121 Capitol, which actually the home was H.B. Sherman's home, who was one of the industrialists when that Capitol Avenue was like a mansion row down through there. So it was kind of a neat old building too.
Yeah.
We decided when my grandfather took it over in the 1940s, and we developed in a funeral home about in the early 70s. We remodeled the third floor, and our family moved in. We lived on the third floor there. I used to joke around. I went to Fremont School, and I was the farthest student from Fremont School, but I was the closest student to WK. So it was, because I was walking distance to Battle Creek Central too, so it wasn't too bad living downtown and growing up and spending time down in the mall. Went in downtown. We hung out downtown a lot, and we were just a few footsteps from downtown, so it was a fun place. And I talked too about we had Calhoun Street back there too, and that was just behind us. And boy, that was a lively area. We had Henry's Ice Cream Parlor. We had Godey's Bakery. We had just a dynamic, little street back there, and that was kind of cool too. So it wasn't bad. We lived on the third floor up there, and I spent more time at friends' houses than they came to see me. So we lived so I got out a lot, and got to go to friends' houses a lot. But it wasn't bad at all. It was a great place to grow up.
Yeah.
Of course, any funeral kid, you washed cars after school, I mowed the lawn, shoveled the snow, moved furniture. Any kid that grew up in that business, did all that stuff. So at a young age, I was, kind of working. I can almost say I've worked in that business all my life. But it was good.
Yeah. Well, and now you've sort of made a transition, and that's maybe a good segue. And I know you mentioned in the book when you moved as a family out to the south side of town too.
Yeah.
But the Defy the Immediate, a journey of failure, perseverance, and success, and why it was a big change for you. I mean, but not really, because you started in writing. But we'll get into that. Why did you decide to write this book?
Well, actually, I've always wanted to write a book, and growing up, I read a lot of, motivational books, and I grew up in the era when they had all the, I can't remember some of the authors that were out there that, all the, during the 70s, the kind of me generation, all the self-help books that came out and all that. So I've always been doing that, and leadership, the Covey leadership books and all that. So I kind of like to do something like that, but I want to have a purpose to it. And actually, I said, well, what kind of angle am I going to take on this? And the book started with my Navy experience, because in the Navy, I didn't have a real good experience. So I wanted to write a book for junior officers, and basically how to survive in the military and how to overcome. And so I started writing the Navy stories in there first, and got in there. And then I got thinking, well, it's kind of interesting how I got to the Navy, because I kind of came in a different direction and why I was there. So I kind of went both backwards and forwards from that point. And ended up kind of morphing into, kind of a whole life story that I kind of wanted to do it with a motivational twist, because that's something I kind of wanted to do, is get out and, everybody's facing challenges, and even launching a book at the beginning of a pandemic is a challenge too, and it was like, it's almost kind of ironic that, that the subject of the book is about overcoming things, and then boom, all of a sudden you were thrown thrown that when it first launched. So it's which was kind of interesting. But anyways, like each chapter, if you read through it, has a kind of a lessons learned. There's some interesting things that happened. I've met a lot of interested people and tried to write positively about it. And even with bad experiences, the point is even if a bad experience, it's what you can learn from it and go from there. And that, one of the things that they always talked about, that, failure is never final, and, until you, either find a way or make a way.
Yeah.
Or change the situation to that, which may mean, giving up doing something, and wrestling was want to say quitting, but sometimes it's okay to quit. If it's not, if you're not doing the right thing, you're not going the right direction, and maybe that's not the direction you're supposed to go. So you shouldn't beat yourself up over it.
Yeah. I was really impressed with how, I think really unflinchingly honest you were in every chapter, and you really did. I actually another member of the community and I, a year or so ago, before the pandemic, we did this seminar on the ethical will, and that's what this really put me in mind of, because it talks a lot about who you are and how you achieved what you achieved and what you want people to know about it. So it's the substance of what you leave. I don't know if you had that in mind, but it's and so in the very beginning, I mean, talk a little bit about, you started with the military, so let's start there. And you're very proud of your service, and that's how I've always known you. So I was a little surprised to see that it wasn't easy for you. It actually was a challenge. Talk about that a little bit.
Well, you've been involved with journalism and like that, and kind of the gist of the book was that I was attracted to the Navy public affairs, which is I'd had some exposure to people, that do that kind of work. And the Navy at the time was building. Of course, Ronald Reagan had become president, and he was really building the Navy. And there's a lot of opportunity there. But the public affairs community was the smallest community in the Navy, and really hard trying to people to know about it. And it comes down to getting the right information. And so I went in, and under the idea that I had to go in and be a regular officer first. I had to go in and just my area was surface warfare, and I had to go through, do all that. And once you got qualified, then you could come over and go to that community. And it made sense, because how do you, promote the military? How do you talk about it if you haven't done it, if you haven't been there, if you don't know what it's all about? So that made sense to me. So, but I didn't really. It was kind of a means to an end, and I found myself. I was competing. Here I was a journalist, but yet I was even going through officer candidate school. I'm competing with guys who were engineers, physics majors, kind of right brain, left brain people. And it was hard. I mean, some of the stuff, having to grasp the concept of engineering, navigation, all these things that, and it was just things that, I wasn't that familiar with, nor was I pursuing it for a lot of the people were real hard chargers of competing against you. Their goal was to go on, command a ship, and become an admiral. And that really wasn't my goal. I wanted to go over in public affairs, be a public affairs officer. So I kind of tried to just do the best I can, kind of,
So you were trying to learn the whole operation before you became that public affairs officer,
so,
then.
And this is good, because when I eventually did become a public affairs officer, and in hindsight, you can look back, and all those experiences made me a better public affairs officer, because I could know what I was talking about.
Yeah.
I'd been there and I'd done that, and which was good. Maybe I didn't do it, quite as well as I should have, but at least I knew what I'm talking about. When you see people like the Pentagon or the senior military people who get up and talk, or the public affairs thing, you got to have some background in what you're talking about. Sometimes you have to have some to tell our Joel was to tell the Navy story. And then not only that, is kind of came in right at the beginning of the information age, and it was transforming. We were still, a lot of in public affairs anyways, we were viewed as the propagandists, and we were people, that, if you look back at World War II, that era, I mean, they employed a lot of people who, propaganda was a form of warfare, and putting things out. And the whole concept was, we had to be truthful. And then things happened. The internet came along, and we had to figure out how to deal with it, because something happened at sea or something happened to a ship. You had kids on the ship that were now young kids who figured out stuff and were sending it back to their parents. Their parents were feeding the media, and we kind of lost our message, and how we do that. So we had to figure out, whoa, how do we handle this new concept of the internet and time compression and so. On the other hand, I got involved in the reserve eventually, and just to the beginning of as it was growing and as it was starting to take off, and developed into a really strong career path that now is an important part of to be able to tell their story truthfully. And the American public has a right to know, and so you had to have those the credibility to tell the story and to tell it accurately. Like we said, if you don't tell your story, well, somebody else will, and how that in the media, how that goes. So it's not that we were just trying to be truthful. We're trying to be, so the whole public affairs kind of community grew during my time, which was exciting to be part of eventually. So.
Sure. Yeah. Early in the book, you talk about when you began your tour on the USS Charleston.
Mm-hmm.
And one of the things that really struck me about that is that, well, one, you expected the best out of people.
Yeah.
I read, and that you had to learn really about how much leadership you really were capable of. It was like in hindsight almost that you realized. In fact, I wanted to read this little piece. I also came to realize juniors, and that's junior officers. Right. Juniors had more power than we realized. Many officers on the ship had the power to do something about the situation, but couldn't muster the courage to do so. Nearly all of us took the path of least resistance and let a bad situation fester. Mm-hmm. Many of us had the power and the authority to do something, but not the courage. So talk about that a little bit.
Yeah. On that ship, it's kind of interesting because I came from an aircraft carrier, and everybody on an aircraft carrier, I mean, that's a life and death every day. I mean, the flight deck is probably one of the most dangerous workplaces in the world. And just the caliber of people on the ship, everybody there kind of has an idea that, we got to be good. We got to do things right first time, every time. And I came from that environment. Then I came to, actually what I was pursuing was the surface Navy, and I came to find that the surface Navy was a little looser, that, it was a little, didn't quite, weren't quite the caliber and mindset that the carrier was in the aviation community, who dealt with fast moving situations, who dealt with, and it was just from a leadership standpoint, it was just such an amazing observation going from that, where people, I mean, aviators have to make split-second decisions, life and daily there's life and death struggles with getting a plane back on the deck. I mean, it was just the way it was all the time. And then with us, it was kind of the other ship, it was just kind of just a whole different mindset, a whole different work ethic, a whole different, and trying to be a leader in that, it was a lot more difficult, motivating people. And I guess he expected more of some people than it happened, and it just didn't, it was a conundrum. It was just, I had a hard time with that. And it was, I came from a fast pace, high intensity, this is how we do it. And then So it was just like, and that's just the diversity of the military too. I mean,
Sure.
depending on what you with, what, and like anything in the military, you can go from really good to really bad really quickly, and vice versa. And nothing lasts forever. So, and people, when things got bad, it's kind of like, well, we know this is going to pass, so people may not do anything about it because this too shall pass. And that was tough too, because you got to live through that and do that. So there was a lot of learning experiences there, especially with leadership. And hopefully I can impart some of that to, leadership is dynamic. And there's not the right and wrong answer for everything, and sometimes pragmatism has to work a little bit better than, the proven method of, this is how we do it. This is,
Yeah.
a lot of times the higher ups, this is how we expected to do it, but it's not working. It's not, So
if you had to go through those experiences again, how do you think you'd be different, and what are you hoping your reader is learning from your experience?
I just hope that people that read this can understand that nothing is permanent. And I think in some of these chapters I said that in hindsight you really had the power to change it. You really had the power to do it, and whether or not you could, it's just a matter of finding the right people, mentoring other people. I think that was a big thing I learned, that trusting the right people. There's a lot of people you should never trust. And anyone who cuts corners or does anything was just, couldn't be trusted with anything else.
Yeah.
I found that out, and people who, but those, who demand without any accountability too is not good either, So there's all kinds of different leadership styles, and it was just to be able to see all that in the military was just amazing. I mean, it was just, hopefully I got some of that in the book, because I had some really good people and some really people I'd rather not deal with again,
Yeah, sure. That way everywhere. And I think it really does come through the book. But all those experiences kind of like set you up for what you, I mean, you went to school at Central Michigan University. Go Chips.
Yep.
You actually had the opportunity to escort Ben Bradley, the famous editor of the Washington Post, who visited campus.
Yeah, that was a great story too. I was a young freshman journalist, and I was covering university events one day, and the guy, I guess, that ran university events, liked me. So I started out, he says, I tell you what, he says, we need somebody to go to the airport and pick up Ben Bradley. He was coming to speak. And this was back right after Watergate. And, so yeah, I'll go pick him up. They gave me a car, and, figured I was, a journalism student, and it'd be good to, have some relationship with him. Yeah. And so I picked him up over at Midland and brought him to the airport. What's funny is that, before I did that, I tried to research him. And back in my college days, before the internet, all he had was the library. And honestly, the only thing I could find on Ben Bradley in our library at the time was a Who's Who book, Who's Who, which doesn't tell you too much about that. And a book that he wrote a book about Johnny We Hardly Knew You, because he was friends with John F. Kennedy, and it was rare that a journalist got to be so close to a president, and he became very close friends with John F. Kennedy. So he wrote a book. So his book and Who's Who was about the only reference that I had. Unless I dug and tried, he didn't have the internet yet to Google it and pull up the stuff or pull up news articles. So I didn't have a whole lot to go on, with it. Just with, of course, movie All the President's Men had been out, and we all knew that. Well, anyways, I ended up bringing him back to campus. And I said, well, so you got the car, why don't you just take him around and and get him to all his appointments? So I ended up for 2 days being his tour guide, escort on campus, and all that. And then they said, well, if you're a journalism student, how'd you like to introduce him at the speech set, Friday night or whatever? Okay. So I wrote up a speech and stood up in front of the auditorium as a freshman in front of about 2,500 people and introduced him. And it was like pretty cool, you know. I ran up on stage and introduced him, and it was and I guess the speech was entitled "To Print or Not to Print," and then he talked about the dilemma back in the day that, you know, the newspaper were the gatekeepers, and, you know, what do we print, what do we not print. And there was a story at that time about somebody had gotten the plans for a nuclear bomb, and should they print the details on how to build a bomb. You know, that was the time. That was actually what they debated and things like that. You know, now you can Google it and, you know, get it and all that, but they took that seriously, and they talked about, and it was a petty discussion on whether or not, you know, what should be published, what shouldn't be published, and, you know, they were true gatekeepers of the time.
Yeah, yeah.
And,
how much did Watergate influence you at the time? Is that why you went into to study journalism?
a little bit of it. I got into it in high school because I worked on our yearbook, and then found out, you know, I was a pretty decent writer, and, you know, I ended up having me write a lot of stuff in the yearbook, and it got real interesting. Then I started studying like how to write, you know, as a reporter, and, you know, how to write a lead, how to write a story. It was kind of fun, you know. And then I too, you know, I got into the newspaper at Central, started taking journalism classes. It's kind of cool to see your byline, you know. I think I said about, you know, my first front page byline in the college newspaper is I got to interview the campus Democrats on their efforts to draft Ted Kennedy for president, which is, today, looking back, it's kind of, that's pretty, yeah, that was a big deal. That was my first front page story. So,
oh, wow.
Their efforts, campus Democrats' efforts to draft Ted Kennedy.
Funny. One of my favorite anecdotes in the story was I believe if I remember correctly, it was between when you were going in the Navy, right? And you drove out to Montana to be with Joe Schwartz and his late wife, Ann.
Yeah.
And you had a traveling companion.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah, of course, our family, we're good friends. My dad and Joe Schwartz grew up together. We're great friends for years, and we're still friends today. And they had their place in Montana, and we caravanned out there, and I had my car, and he had his car, and we filled up this car with stuff. But that time, he'd had a Japanese exchange student that was living with Yosuke Maki, and he just had his first year in the United States here. Apparently, I think he was the son of a doctor in Japan, and he sent him over here to attend school here, and as a kind of a cultural exchange and all that. So he didn't speak much English, so we kind of it was you know, we chatted as much as we could, and it was interesting. Yeah.
But you had the universal language of Olivia Newton-John.
Yeah, on cassette tape in my cassette deck, and he loved that. Oh my God, we listened to Olivia Newton-John all the way out. And all he was hooked on it. He loved that. It was like, but it was fun. We had a good time, and that was a great summer. And that was just before I went in the Navy.
Yeah,
kind of the last hurrah before I shoved off.
Yeah, a great place to do it, Montana. So, explain the title to us a little for the audience.
Well, when I started talking, you know, about the things I'd been through, and, you know, and I remembered back when I was at Central in about 1980. Of course, Dick Enberg, the sports broadcaster, is a CMU graduate. He actually, in the 1950s, and he you know, he's probably the most well-known alumnus of CMU. And he came back, and the only commencement speech he did was in 1980. And I went to that. I had a lot of friends graduating, but the thing that I took from it is he talked a lot about that time Dr. Anspaugh. Dr. Anspaugh was the president of Central when he was a student there, and he actually took Central from post-war and literally built the school up until the 1960s. In fact, he died about the year before I arrived on campus, but he literally took it from a small college post-war to triple the size of the school, built into but back in those days, he was an orator, and he did student body lectures, and he was also the school's top recruiter. And part of his recruiting was going around to high schools, and he did a whole lot of high school commencement speeches and did a lot of those. And one of the ones he did in 1950 was Armada, Michigan, and he went there, and this little guy by the name of Dick Enberg got real interested in like that, and met him and talked to him. And Dr. Anspaugh gave Dick Enberg a $100 scholarship on the spot to come to Central Michigan. So he ended up moving to Central, and he worked broadcast. He got into broadcasting there at Central Michigan, I think at WCEN. That's where he first started, and went on with that. And he actually ended up, he graduated summa cum laude from Central and was student body president. So he really had real connection to the school.
Yeah.
And but anyways, he talked about Dr. Anspaugh. Dr. Anspaugh did a Friday afternoon student body lecture, and back when the school was about 2,000 students, most of them would all come into the auditorium and all that. And he'd do a lecture and different things. And Dr. Anspaugh's catchphrase was "Defy the Immediate," which meant that you had to kind of just defy what was going on, persevere, and get through it. And he always talked about you had to defy the immediate, and that just stuck with me. So I reached out to a mutual acquaintance of his, and they asked me to write the foreword for my book, because I remembered that equation, defy the immediate, from his speech. And that's remembered that phrase stuck with me all that time. I'm like, that's kind of what I did. I defied the immediate, throughout my whole career. And I think that'd be a great title for the book. And and then kind of bonus that he was excited. I corresponded with. I never met him, but I got several emails, and he was quite excited because he just loved Central. He loved doing things there, and he just was so attached to that school and did so many things there for it. It's just it was great. So I wished I could have met him, but fortunately we lost him about a couple months before I published.
Yeah. So you cover a lot of those moments. What do you think the biggest challenge of your life was?
Biggest challenge?
Yeah. And how did you defy the immediate?
That's a good question. What was the biggest challenge? Well, I think the whole Navy itself was a challenge. Yeah. The fact that you were in a situation that you just had to wait it out. You couldn't do that. And just to persevere every day, and just to get through it. And you kind of like, I'm going to get through this eventually. And kind of knowing that you didn't really have much of a future left with where you're at right now. So you're kind of at a roadblock, but you still have to perform. You still have to be there and do that. That's probably one of the toughest things. The other toughest thing, I think, is after losing my dad, just keeping the business. For 15 years after he died, it was a challenge just to keep it. And I always, it wasn't just maintaining the business; it was growing it. It was and keeping it at the level that it was at. And we're pretty proud of the fact that we didn't sell a sinking ship when it at the time came, and it was strong. It was well thought of. It was at the top of its game, and
sure.
But every day, just the stress of that, I think that's kind of what made me decide. It's like I'd seen other funeral directors who never gave it up, who never retired, who literally died in the saddle, and I just didn't want to go down that. Didn't want it's there's more to life than working. And you've made a contribution, you've done this, and you've raised it this far. It's just it's time to move on. That was hard to move on.
Sure, you feel like you're walking away from something.
Yeah. Yeah, you feel like you're letting people down. You feel like you have such a history here. You have but it doesn't mean you can't go on. Do something else. It's like I wrestled in there with about right after we sold the business. It's kind of like, how was retirement? And I just drove me crazy because I was only at the time 55, and I said, I'm not retired. I'm working my fourth career. And and it's like, and I just didn't feel like I'm retired. I'm not. I look like I'm retired. And I'm like, I just changed businesses. I just, did something else. And then I always equated retirement with giving up, and I tied it with but maybe not so much anymore. Or my friends are. So, but it's kind of you make it what it is. I mean, my idea of retirement is devoting time to doing the things I want to do. So
yeah. Well, and I wanted to ask you, especially after your naval career, and you brought that up. How did that make you who you are today? I mean, what did you glean from the accumulation of all these experiences?
Yeah.
And who are you today? How would you define that?
I would say the Navy, in a lot of ways, made me, well, one, just the greatness of our country and what, when we went overseas and the respect that we had in different places. I think, that had an impact on me. I think just the commitment to excellence. I mean, looking back, even though I struggled on the aircraft carrier, I was on there just to be on that for 3 years. And the things we did, the fact that you drove the ship that launched aircraft, and that it was just the pride and the teamwork and the dedication of everybody there was just, and don't settle for second best. I mean, that just sometimes you just gotta, and you can't, you gotta always strive for excellence and be excellent and be the one, be the leader. And it's just, I think I took that away too, is that don't be mediocre. And there's no place for mediocrity there, because mediocrity will kill you in the military. And that was, I think that was a big lesson I learned, is that you gotta be, strong.
Yeah. All right. Well, thank you. The book, you can get it at the library, but I'll bet TR would appreciate if you bought a couple copies too. But I just want to say how much I appreciate your willingness to share a lot of really personal stories and how they shaped you and your response to them, and your commitment to still growing. I mean, you took the plunge and wrote a book, and starting another career.
I could talk with the whole experience of doing that, and the publishing business, and my gosh, it's just talk about it. It's just a whole different ball game. And the thing is, technically it's self-published, but it's assisted self-published what I did. But it's still, and one of the stories I told is that when I first editor I got, he looked at this thing and he says, well, you haven't landed a plane in the Hudson River. You haven't been fired from the White House. You're not an athlete. Who are you? That's right. I think I'm your average, everyday, representative of my generation who did some extraordinary things. So talking about that and kind of try to put it all into perspective. And I think my generation, really, we, post-war, beginning of the space age, going through the things we went through in my generation, I wish more people would write about the great things we did. The great things that we went through that just aren't around anymore.
Yeah. Well, maybe there's another book coming. How about that?
It could be.
All right. Well, TR, thank you so much for coming on the show. Defy the Immediate. And next week, not as stories at Sundown Week. Next week is Peeks into the Past, and we're going to take a look at Battle Creek Theaters, which is just a fun. What was your favorite theater, TR?
Right, it was just the other day we were talking about that, and I saw Star Wars at the Bijou.
The Bijou.
That was like, we saw that. That was I love that. That's the orange. I wish we'd still had that. Of course, Michigan was nice too, but it was. I remember the Bijou especially,
Yeah.
The ornate, just why we gave that thing up and tore it down. Beyond me, but that was great. Because I
Yeah.
like to go to the Park Theater out in Augusta. That was fun too. Went out there a lot.
So we'll cover Battle Creek Theaters next week. So I hope you all join us.
It's good.
And TR, thanks for coming on, and stay with me after the show, TR, real quick. And good night, everybody. And I hope to see you next week. Enjoy this beautiful summer evening.